is the sixth and the last session on the data breaches and the related procedures. So as we already introduced myself, I did in the first session itself that I'm Akanksha and I am associated with Tsaaro as a senior data protection consultant. I am CIPP certified. So that was a little brief about me. Now we're talking about the data breach and the related procedures. So if we talk about the elements that go on to define a data breach, then I would say a data breach is a security violation wherein there should be a malicious intent attached to it, to the security violation, so as to have an unauthorized access to the confidential data. So if we combine all the elements of the data breach, then it would result in a cybersecurity incident, which is the data breach. So if we look at the scope of the data breaches, so data breach is a very vast or a broad topic for the security incidents, and it is one of the most common and the costliest incidents of all. If we talk about the impact on the businesses, so I would say that impact on the businesses can be calculated or can be weighed in terms of what kind of processing activities is one organization taking up. And say if one organization is processing medical data, which goes or falls in the criteria of sensitive personal information, then the impact or the effect would be adverse. And then we can also go on to quantify the impact in terms of the size of the organization, the kind of industry that it is coming from, and also its geographical or the territorial location. Then looking at the effects of it, so we can go on to say that data breaches can be of two types. First being the accidental, and second being intentional. As we talked about, there should be a malicious intent also. So for the first one, wherein we are talking about accidental data breaches, we can take the example of, say, if the devices or the company laptops have been lost by one of the employees, then it might result into a data breach. And for the malicious intent kind of data breaches, then that would involve a person who wants to have unauthorized access to the personal data or the personal information. What is going to be the end result of it would be some sort of destruction, loss, or alteration by one unauthorized person to the personal data in the process of being transmitted and stored. So that was a little brief introduction about the data breach and what is it all about. Moving forward from here, so as in my previous session also, when I took up the responsibilities of a DPO also, I mentioned a DPO is responsible for making the employees of an organization aware of what data protection is all about and nuances of it also. That was for a purpose so that employees in an organization know, and they also know how to identify what sort of issues can arise with the data protection practices or the compliance measures one organization has been taking up. So this will help each of the employee, irrespective of the department that they are working in, to identify the data breaches if they're happening at their end. So there are very many ways in which we can identify, or there are very many warning signs in which we can identify that a data breach is happening, or any unusual activity that is happening in our devices or systems. So starting off, there could be any unexpected software or system processes that are running in your devices, or there could be any alerts from malware protection solutions and various notifications which we are not expected, which we're not expecting. There could be like repeated application or system crashes that of one certain application which you take help from to conduct your day-to-day business, that is crashing again and again. So that would be one unusual activity that is happening. Another thing would be strange user activity or logging in can be seen from the end of the IT admin. If IT admin goes on to see that such an activity is being conducted, or he gets a notification for the same, then he can go on to identify the data breach. Moving on, we can look at the abnormal or the unusual behavior that is happening on the disk activity, and also during the process of a browsing, wherein we can see certain pop-ups or the redirection is happening, which we're not actually wanting to click on to, or which we're not actually expecting on our screens. So, I mean, a lot of us while browsing, we see that there are certain pop-ups which are very irrelevant to what we are browsing, or the page is redirecting again and again to say clean up application that your device has so many issues, go on to clean up. It also it is a malware of kind that it also goes on to say, if you're talking about mobile devices, it also knows what kind of mobile devices are you using. So if you're using a Google Pixel 6, it will go on to tell you that go clean up your Google Pixel 6 because there are certain risks that are coming up there. So similarly for all the devices, these pop-ups of the redirection can go on to identify your device also, but we're not supposed to click on the same and go on to connect with the IT team, or any department which is responsible for it, so as to this issue can be looked at the first instance itself. Also, another warning sign could be about the configuration changes that are happening, and also if you are being logged out of your usual day-to-day accounts, or the password changes happening. So we can identify that these are certain signs which we need to look at, and all the employees or all the people working in an organization should know about these signs, so as to if they are coming across such behavior, they can go on to identify the respected person who is responsible for it. And the most common and the major warning sign is a message from an attacker. So message from an attacker can come to you in any communication platform whatsoever. They can go on to ask for any confidential information, or any amount of money. So that can also happen, any amount of money, so that they'll tell you that we are going to do this breach to your system. So give us that money. So that can also happen in form of a communication. It can come to you as a message or an email. So every employee of each organization should know that these are the identifying factors for the data breach if it's happening. Moving on, what should be our behavior when a data breach occurs? So if we are in an organization, uh, being like, it can be a controller or a processor, be it anything. So what should be our behavior to control or to put a check uh, onto a situation wherein data breaches happen? So there are certain measures, first being the internal measures that one should take, and second being the external measures. So once the data exfiltration happens, what you can do is, internally, first we look at the internal factors or the internal measures that one should take, then we look at the external ones. So for internal ones, we should go on to look at the number of the data records that have been exposed, so as to we can identify or quantify what sort of breaches happened and how much effect will it do on the rights of the data subjects. Then we should go on to measure to the possible adverse effects, so as to do the process of mitigation of the risks. Then we'll have to see what kind of categories of data is breached. So as we already know that there could be some data which does not go on to identify a certain person, or it has an element which does not have an identifier. So if a category of that sort has been breached, then it is not a problem. It is not giving out any information whatsoever. So we need to identify what categories or what sort of data is being breached. Next would be the measures that will be taken to contain the data breach. Organizations need to confirm or decide onto that what sort of measures will they take, and also look at the consequences of the data breaches. So these are certain things or measures that, or the immediate steps that one organization should take once the data breach happens. For the steps that organizations should take with respect to their activities and their obligations to the data protection regulations would be that if one organization is identifying itself as a processor, then the processor is obligated to inform the controller of any data breach that has happened. And then in turn, that data controller is responsible to notify or to communicate it to the supervisory authority within 72 hours that a breach has happened. So once the notification has been sent, the data protection authority then go on to do its job and also look at what next steps should be taken, and also keep a check or an eye on the next steps taken up by that organization as well. Another thing that one organization need to take is that when they are categorizing the data that is breached, they should also look at whether or not such a breach is imposing a high risk to the consumer rights and their freedoms or not. So if certain breach is doing so, then it is an obligation on the part of that organization to go on to alert the data subjects of the same, that your data was compromised, this has happened, and these are our next steps that will be taken forward from here. So this is about what should be the initial steps after a breach happens. Moving on from here, we will talk about the responses after a data breach has happened. So if I am one organization and I am discovering that a data breach has happened within my organization, then what should I do next? So earlier we talked about the immediate steps. Now we're talking about what can be done later. So once the breach is reported, the organization need to look at if at all it puts the data subjects, the consumers, and all the people associated with that data which has been breached, they should be notified and they should be communicated as well. If a data controller organization has faced a data breach, the next step should be to take up the objective assessment in the first place, in the first instance, to look at the severity of the impact it is going to put the data subjects at. Then he or she, they should go on to perform a risk assessment for the breach, so as to look at the breach management system. Next would be, it should also, the risk assessment, when it is taken up, it helps to address the breach and also look at the next steps or the remediation measures that one organization should take. Then that particular controller or the organization should look at the effective measures or the mechanisms, so as to look at the mitigation practices that can be involved to do away with the loss that the breach has caused. Then next thing would be, say if the data breach is not of the size that it is to be reported to the supervisory authority, the risk assessment still becomes a necessity, so that in the future, if something of this sort happens and it goes on to affect the rights of the consumers also, then it can be mitigated in the first instance itself. All right. So as I mentioned that if there is a situation where the data breaches happen, which is going to affect the data subjects adversely, then according to the regulation, it is necessary and it is a obligation on the part of the organization to go on to communicate the same to the data subject as soon as possible. So there hasn't been a time defined for the same as it has been defined for the supervisory authorities of 72 hours. But for communication to the data subjects, no specific time has been defined. So for communication, we'll have to look at, say, 4 elements here. First being the description or the nature of the breach that has happened. So if I'm organization A, I'm looking at a breach that has happened, I need to notify my data subjects. So I will define it to them that this has happened, so and so data sets have been breached, and we're looking at it right now. Second would be the impact or the consequences that the breach will take up. So in the communication, the organization needs to also notify about the consequences. Third thing that needs to be there in the communication should be the details of the DPO, so as to, if a data subject is there and they want to understand the whole scenario, or they want to communicate to the organization on the next steps, or they just want to understand how the breach happened, for any communication whatsoever, the details should be mentioned so that data subjects can reach out for the same. Next would be immediate mitigation steps or the remediation steps that are taken by the organization. They should also be mentioned, so that to reassure the data subjects that yes, we are taking measures to contain the loss that has happened or the destruction that has happened. So looking at one of the examples of communication to the data subjects. So in the year 2019, a similar data breach happened with Canva, which is a designing application or a software. So they went on to compromise at about 4 million user accounts. And it when they identified that the user data is being compromised, then they were obligated to send out a communication to the data subjects. So we have also attached on this slide the screenshot for the communication that was sent out. It was sent to the data subjects on email, and Canva went on to also notify the FBI about it, because they were looking at the breach happening again, or they were of the fact that it might happen again as well. Looking at the exceptions to the communication. So if we're looking at a situation where the controller has already implemented appropriate TOMs, which are the technical and organizational measures in the organization, then they would not be required to send out the communication, because if they already have the best practices in place and still the breach happened, then they need to like rework on it and get the thing done. Next thing would be, if the controller has already taken the subsequent measures to look at the high risk at which the data of those data subjects has been exposed to, then there is not a requirement for such a communication. If and third would be, if that communication is going to be disproportionate in nature, if it is going to take elaborate or extensive efforts from the side of, say, the organization, then the communication can be done away with. So if we're looking at, say, a lot of data subjects, then the communication can be done on a public platform also. Like how we looked at Canva's communication, it was done on email. But if it is going to take disproportionate measures, then at a public platform also, like if we are using Twitter, one organization can go on to announce the same. For the regular practices, I would say it is not recommended to announce such breaches to the data subjects on a public platform. But if the if it is going to take disproportionate actions, efforts from the site, then this exception is there, and then you can go on to announce it on a public platform. I didn't not communicate it to them individually. So this brings us to the end of this sixth segment of the masterclass as well. So you can scan this code for the quiz. It has several questions. They are very basic in nature, and the form will also help you get the certificate of participation. I hope everyone has scanned and participated in the quiz. So this brings us to the end of the whole masterclass.